Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the English Globe. It is always a great honor to have you with us, joining from different countries and backgrounds, all connected by the same goal: learning English and understanding the world better. Every episode, we bring together important global topics and use them as a way to practice language. We know that learning English becomes easier when you connect it with real events. That is why we choose subjects that are not only interesting, but also meaningful.
Exactly, Adam. And today we have a topic that is both complex and fascinating. We are going to talk about Trump versus China and the fight over Bagram Airbase. This is not a small story. It is a subject that links politics, history, security, and the balance of power. Even if you have never heard of Bagram Airbase before, you will soon understand why so many leaders around the world care about it. We will explain everything in simple English, step by step, so that you can learn and practice while following the discussion.
Let us first make a warm invitation to all our dear listeners. Wherever you are listening from, whether you are at home, on the way to school, at work, or maybe relaxing in a park, we ask you to be part of our community. Please like this video, subscribe to the English Globe, and most importantly, leave us a comment below. Tell us where you are listening from. We love seeing learners from every part of the world. Last time, we had people writing from Brazil, India, Nigeria, Germany, and many other countries. Each comment shows how English unites us.
And not only that, we want to hear your opinion about today's topic. Do you think military bases in other countries bring safety, or do they create more problems? There is no single right answer, and every idea is valuable. This podcast is not just about listening, it is about joining a conversation. So even if your English is still simple, don't be shy. Use the new words we introduce, write a short comment, and become part of this global discussion. Remember, every small step in practice builds confidence.
Now let us set the stage. Bagram Airbase is located in Afghanistan, and for many years, it was the largest U.S. base in the region. It was built during the Cold War, expanded during the War on Terror, and became a symbol of American presence in Central Asia. When the United States withdrew from Afghanistan, the base was left behind, but its importance did not disappear. Former President Donald Trump has spoken about wanting to take it back, seeing it as critical for U.S. security. At the same time, China looks at Bagram as a challenge to its influence.
So why is this important? Because Bagram is not only about Afghanistan. It is about how the world works. For the United States, the base represents power, reach, and security. For China, it represents possible threats to its regional goals. For Afghanistan, it represents sovereignty and the right to decide what happens on its land. Each side sees the base differently, and those differences create tension. This is why world leaders, analysts, and even ordinary people continue to talk about Bagram. And today we bring this story to you in clear English.
As English learners, you will benefit from this discussion in two ways. First, you will improve your vocabulary and listening skills. Second, you will gain knowledge about international relations. Some of the words we will focus on include airbase, which means a place where military aircraft operate; sovereignty, which is the power of a country to make its own decisions; influence, which means the ability to affect others; and tension, which means stress or conflict between countries. These words will come up again and again.
Yes, and our goal is not just to explain but also to help you practice. As we go through today's podcast, we encourage you to repeat the new words out loud. Say them slowly and clearly. Try to make simple sentences with them. For example, the airbase is in Afghanistan. Or, a country must protect its sovereignty. Or, leaders use influence to change decisions. In this way, you are not just listening, but actively learning. When you practice like this, your memory becomes stronger.
Dear listeners, we want this podcast to be a two-way journey. That is why we keep inviting you to comment. Tell us what you think about Trump's idea of taking back Bagram. Do you believe it helps America's security? Or do you think it creates more tension with China? Do you think Afghanistan should be the only one to decide, or should bigger countries have a role? Sharing your thoughts, even in simple English, is powerful. It shows you are practicing the language while also thinking critically about the world.
So, as we begin this journey, remember the 3 steps. Listen carefully, practice the new vocabulary, and share your ideas in the comments. Together, these steps will make your English stronger every day. And do not forget to like and subscribe so that you can join us again in future episodes. We will continue bringing you global stories explained in simple English. Now that we have welcomed you, introduced our topic, and explained why it matters, we are ready to move deeper into the history of Bagram Airbase in the next part of our discussion.
To understand today's debate, we must first look back in time. Bagram Airbase has a history that goes back many decades. It was originally built during the 1950s and 1960s, in the middle of the Cold War. At that time, Afghanistan was a country caught between 2 great powers, the Soviet Union to the north and the United States watching closely from afar. Both sides were competing for influence, and Afghanistan's location made it a place of high importance. Bagram was developed as part of that competition, to give one side a strategic advantage.
The Cold War was a time of rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was not a direct war with soldiers fighting each other, but it was a struggle for global influence. Countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America often became places where this rivalry played out. Afghanistan was one of those countries. The Soviet Union wanted to keep it within its sphere of influence, while the United States tried to offer support in different ways. Bagram Airbase was a clear example of how international competition shaped local development.
Later, in 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and Bagram became one of their most important military bases in the country. The Soviets used it for planes, helicopters, and supply operations. It became a symbol of their presence. But this presence also created resistance, as Afghan fighters known as the Mujahideen opposed the Soviet forces. The United States supported the Mujahideen with weapons and training during the 1980s as part of its Cold War strategy. So, Bagram Air Base became linked not only to the Soviets, but also to America's indirect involvement.
After the Soviet withdrawal in 1989, Afghanistan entered a long period of civil war. Different groups fought for control, and Bagram changed hands several times. At this point, the base was damaged, and it was no longer a center of global competition. But the story did not end there. In 2001, after the terrorist attacks of September 11th, the United States invaded Afghanistan. Very quickly, American forces repaired and expanded Bagram Air Base. It became the largest U.S. base in the country, and soon it turned into a symbol of the war on terror.
During the 20 years of U.S. presence in Afghanistan, Bagram grew into something massive. It had 2 long runways that could handle almost any aircraft, housing for thousands of troops, hospitals, offices, and even shops. For American soldiers, it was a place of safety in a difficult war. For Afghans, it was a reminder of foreign military presence. For the wider world, it showed how far the United States was willing to go to protect its security and fight terrorism. Bagram was not just a military base. It was a sign of American power in Central Asia.
And this is why Bagram became so symbolic. When people thought about the US in Afghanistan, many of them thought first about Bagram. For supporters, it showed America's strength and ability to respond to threats. For critics, it showed occupation and dependence. When the US finally left Afghanistan in 2021, closing Bagram Air Base was seen as the end of an era. The pictures of empty hangars and silent runways spread across the world, marking a turning point not only for Afghanistan, but for American foreign policy as well.
For English learners, let us pause here to highlight some important vocabulary. The first word is Cold War. This was the period from the late 1940s to the early 1990s, when the United States and the Soviet Union competed for power and influence. The second word is airbase, which means a military airport used for planes and helicopters. The third word is occupation, which describes when foreign troops control an area. Each of these words will help you understand not only this story, but also other global issues.
Let's add a few more words. One important word is symbol. A symbol is something that represents a bigger idea. Bagram was a symbol of power. Another word is presence. In politics, presence means being active or involved in a place, often through military or economic influence. And finally, the word withdrawal. In military terms, withdrawal means when an army leaves a place. These words are used often in news reports and history books. By practicing them, you will feel more confident when reading or listening to international stories.
To practice, let us make some short sentences. For example, during the Cold War, countries competed for influence. Or, Bagram Airbase was a symbol of American presence in Afghanistan. Or, the withdrawal of U.S. forces in 2021 ended their control of Bagram. Try repeating these sentences slowly. You can also write your own. Even simple practice like this helps you move from passive listening to active use of English. That is the secret to improving your language skills while learning history at the same time.
So now we can see why Bagram matters so much. It is not just a place in Afghanistan. It is part of the history of the Cold War, the Soviet invasion, the American war on terror, and the global balance of power. Each time, the base stood for something bigger than itself. That is why today, when Trump and China argue about its future, the debate is not only about land or buildings. It is about the meaning of power, security, and influence in our modern world. And that is the story we will continue to explore together.
To understand today's debate, we must look at how former U.S. President Donald Trump views Bagram Airbase. For Trump, this base is not just a piece of land in Afghanistan. In his speeches and interviews, he has often spoken about Bagram as a missed opportunity. He believes that leaving it behind during the withdrawal in 2021 was a mistake. For him, Bagram represents strategic value, a place that could give the United States influence in Central Asia, right next to China's borders. In his political vision, control of such a base strengthens America's global position.
Yes, Adam and Trump often connects Bagram to the larger theme of American security. He argues that the US should not have given up a powerful base that could protect American interests. In his view, Bagram could be used to monitor threats, stop terrorist groups, and even balance China's influence in the region. This idea reflects Trump's broader foreign policy style, which emphasizes strength, presence, and negotiating power. For him, power is not only about the homeland, but also about having a visible presence overseas.
Now, for English learners, let us make this clear. When Trump says the U.S. gave up Bagram, he is criticizing the decision to withdraw. The phrase, gave up, means to stop holding or controlling something. Another phrase he often uses is missed opportunity, which means a chance that was lost. These are everyday English phrases, but in politics they carry strong meaning. By using them, Trump is trying to show that America lost something valuable, something that could have helped protect its people and strengthen its influence abroad.
That is a good point. Trump also uses language that links military decisions to national pride. He talks about American strength and American security. These are powerful words because they connect foreign policy to the emotions of ordinary citizens. When people hear about strength and security, they feel reassured. When they hear about weakness or loss, they feel concerned. Trump understands this, and he uses such language to make his political arguments stronger. This is an important lesson in how leaders use words to shape opinion.
For learners, this is also a chance to study diplomatic and political phrases. One important phrase is strategic interest. This means something that is important for the long-term safety and success of a country. Another phrase is national security, which is the protection of a nation's people and borders. And finally, the phrase balance of power, which describes how countries try to prevent one side from becoming too strong. Trump's comments about Bagram often connect to all three of these ideas, even if he does not use those exact terms every time.
Let's try to practice those terms with examples. You can say, Bagram was a strategic interest for the United States. Or, national security is a top priority for leaders. Or, the balance of power in Asia is changing. By saying these sentences, you can practice not only vocabulary, but also the rhythm of political English. These are the kinds of phrases you will often hear in speeches, news programs, and debates. Understanding them will help you follow international discussions more easily.
Coming back to Trump's perspective, it is also important to note his communication style. Trump is known for being direct, simple, and often emotional in his language. He does not always use formal diplomatic terms. Instead, he chooses words that ordinary people can understand quickly, like strong, weak, win, or lose. This makes his speeches easy to remember and often very effective. For learners of English, this style shows how short and simple words can sometimes be more powerful than long and complicated ones.
Yes, and when Trump talks about Bagram, he frames it as a question of winning or losing. He suggests that by leaving the base, America lost, and other countries, especially China, might win. This way of speaking is common in political debates because it creates a clear image of competition. People easily understand the idea of winning and losing, and so they respond strongly to it. For English learners, recognizing this pattern helps you see how language is used to create emotion and influence in politics.
But we must remember to stay neutral in our analysis. Our goal here is not to support or criticize Trump, but to understand his point of view and the language he uses. In education, neutrality is important because it allows us to focus on learning without judgment. So, when we look at Trump's statements about Bagram, we can see them as examples of political communication. He links the base to security, pride, and strength. He frames the debate in simple terms of winning and losing. And he uses emotional language to connect with his audience.
And that is exactly why this is a valuable lesson for English learners. By studying Trump's perspective, we learn about the power of words in politics. We see how leaders connect ideas like security, pride, and influence to real places like Bagram Airbase. We also see how simple phrases such as gave up or missed opportunity can carry deep political meaning. For your English learning, this shows that language is not only about grammar and vocabulary. It is also about persuasion, tone, and emotion. That is something we will keep practicing together.
Now that we've explored Trump's perspective, let's turn our attention to China. For China, Bagram Airbase is not just a piece of land in Afghanistan. It represents a possible challenge to its regional plans. China shares a narrow border with Afghanistan, and this makes it sensitive about any strong foreign presence there. If the United States regains influence over Bagram, Beijing worries it could shift the balance of power in Central and South Asia.
Exactly, Adam. China has been working for years on a large project called the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. This project is about building roads, railways, and trade routes across Asia, Africa, and Europe. Afghanistan is in a strategic location for these plans. If the US has a base there, China fears it could limit or even monitor its economic expansion. That is why Beijing often speaks about respecting sovereignty and avoiding foreign military interference.
To put it simply for our listeners, China's concern is about competition. When one major power has a strong position in a region, another power feels uncomfortable. In international relations, this is called geopolitical rivalry. A useful phrase for English learners here is strategic interest. It means a goal that is very important for a country's long-term power and security. For China, Afghanistan touches on both economic interests and national security.
Let me add another example, Adam. Imagine two neighbors who both want to use the same garden. One wants to grow vegetables, and the other wants to build a playground. If the playground is built, it might stop the other from planting vegetables. This is similar to how China views the US at Bagram. The presence of a strong American base could limit China's ability to grow its projects in the region. That is why Beijing carefully watches this debate.
From a political point of view, China often uses certain phrases in its diplomacy. For example, it talks about non-interference, meaning that one country should not control or strongly influence another country's decisions. Another phrase is mutual respect. This means both sides should treat each other's interests fairly. For English learners, these are useful phrases because they appear often in global political speeches and news.
That's right. In fact, when Chinese leaders talk about Bagram or similar issues, they highlight regional stability. This phrase means keeping peace and balance in an area. China argues that foreign bases can disturb stability. For Beijing, the return of the US to Bagram might create more rivalry, and rivalry often brings tension. By teaching you these terms, we hope you not only understand the political story, but also build stronger English vocabulary for world news.
Another concern for China is security at home. China has a region called Xinjiang, which is close to Afghanistan. Beijing is always worried that instability in Afghanistan might influence groups in Xinjiang. So, the presence of the US in Bagram could make China feel like it has less control over its own borders. This is why we can say that China's opposition is not only about economics, but also about national security.
And remember, dear listeners, this is not just about the present moment. China thinks long-term. It sees the next 20 or 30 years as a time when it wants to rise as a global power. Any obstacle, such as an American military base so close to its borders, is seen as a serious challenge. For English learners, an important word here is obstacle. It means something that blocks your way or makes your progress difficult.
So, to summarize China's view, Beijing wants stability, control over its neighborhood, and freedom to grow its economic projects. It sees Bagram Airbase as a place that could block these goals if America regains control. For our listeners, notice how in English we use linking phrases like to summarize, or in other words. These are helpful when you want to explain something clearly, especially in discussions about complex global topics.
That's a great point, Adam. And before we move on, let's highlight today's new vocabulary for our audience: strategic interest, geopolitical rivalry, non-interference, mutual respect, regional stability, and obstacle. These are powerful phrases to understand international news. Dear listeners, try to write them in your notebook and make your own sentences. Practicing these words will help you feel more confident when reading or speaking about world events in English.
Julia, we've talked about the United States and China, but there's another very important voice we need to highlight: Afghanistan itself. After all, Bagram Airbase is on Afghan soil. This means the people and government of Afghanistan have the most direct connection to its future. To begin, let's remember a key word: sovereignty. Sovereignty means the full right of a country to control its own land and make decisions without being ruled by outsiders.
Exactly, Adam. When we think about sovereignty in Afghanistan's case, the question is whether the Afghan people truly get to decide what happens to Bagram. Many Afghans feel that outside powers often treat their country like a chessboard, where bigger countries play games of strategy. But Afghanistan wants to be seen as more than just a location. It wants respect for its sovereignty, which means its independence and right to self-govern without interference.
Let's imagine two perspectives here. On one hand, some Afghan leaders may see benefits in allowing a strong power like the US to use Bagram again. They might believe it could bring security, jobs, and protection from regional instability. On the other hand, many Afghans might argue that foreign military presence keeps their country from standing on its own. They may feel that true stability only comes when Afghanistan decides its own future without foreign bases.
That's a very important point. And listeners, here's another useful word: stability. Stability means safety, calm, and a situation where things do not suddenly change. For Afghanistan, stability has been a dream for decades. Wars, foreign interventions, and internal conflicts have created instability, or the opposite of stability. When Afghans think about Bagram, they ask, does this base bring stability, or does it bring more tension? That question remains very complex.
I want to add one more term: diplomacy. Diplomacy means the way countries talk, negotiate, and solve problems without fighting. For Afghanistan, diplomacy is very important in this debate. The government must use diplomacy to talk with both the United States and China. It must balance relations carefully so that neither side feels ignored. Good diplomacy can give Afghanistan more respect on the global stage, while poor diplomacy could make it look weak or divided.
Let's do a short role-play for our listeners. I'll pretend to be an Afghan leader who supports US presence at Bagram. I might say, we welcome American support because it gives us protection against terrorism. Our region is dangerous, and the presence of US forces means we can build schools and businesses without fear. Notice, listeners, the speaker is focusing on security and development. This is one way some Afghan officials might present their case.
And now I'll take the opposite role. As another Afghan voice, I might say, we cannot have real sovereignty if a foreign power controls our most important military base. Every time another country makes decisions for us, our independence is weakened. We need stability, but it must be Afghan-led, not imposed by outsiders. Listeners, this shows the other perspective. Many Afghans believe that only a self-reliant approach will bring long-term peace and dignity.
These two perspectives reflect the real debate inside Afghanistan. The base is not just about politics, it is about identity, independence, and the future of the nation. This is why when we study global affairs, we must also listen to local voices. It is easy for world powers to argue over strategy, but the people who live near Bagram experience the daily impact. Their sense of sovereignty and stability should be at the center of this conversation.
Listeners, let's pause and practice the key vocabulary once again. Sovereignty means the right of a country to control its own land. Stability means safety and calm, where life is not full of sudden danger. Diplomacy means talking and negotiating instead of fighting. These three words are extremely useful for English learners who want to understand world politics. Try repeating them aloud: sovereignty, stability, diplomacy. Practicing aloud will help you remember.
And here's a learning tip. When you read or listen to news in English, notice how often these three words appear. They are part of the language of international relations. For example, you might hear the country defended its sovereignty, or the region is working towards stability, or diplomacy succeeded in preventing war. By recognizing these patterns, you will become more confident in your listening and speaking skills.
Before we wrap up this section, let's reflect on Afghanistan's unique position. It is not only a country recovering from war, but also a place where powerful nations compete for influence. Yet, Afghans want to show the world that they are more than just a battlefield. They want stability, sovereignty, and dignity. In the debate over Bagram, their voice is essential, and their right to decide should be respected.
That's beautifully said, Adam. And dear listeners, this brings us to a thought. Whenever you read about global issues, remember to ask, what do the people of that country want? It is not enough to only hear from the big powers. Afghanistan's role in the Bagram debate teaches us that true diplomacy requires listening to all voices. And as English learners, When you practice today's vocabulary, you are also practicing empathy and understanding.
Julia, now that we have discussed the perspectives of the United States, China, and Afghanistan, it is time to look at the global reactions. Bagram Airbase is not just important to these three countries. Leaders around the world pay attention because it represents the balance of power in Central Asia. For example, countries in Europe, like Germany and France, watch carefully to see if the US might return, because it could affect NATO and their own strategic interests.
Exactly, Adam. And other countries in Asia, such as India, Pakistan, and Russia, also have strong opinions. India is interested in regional stability and might see American presence as a positive influence. Pakistan, on the other hand, is cautious because US bases in Afghanistan can change the dynamics near its border. Russia views any American return to Bagram as a potential challenge to its influence in Central Asia. This shows that Bagram is not just local, it has global implications.
One of the key terms to understand here is alliance. An alliance is an agreement between countries to work together for security or other purposes. The United States has alliances around the world, and these alliances can shape reactions to Bagram. For example, European countries often support American strategies because they are part of NATO. For English learners, the word alliance is useful because it appears in news, history, and political discussions.
Another important term is diplomacy. Diplomacy is how countries communicate, negotiate, and solve problems without using violence. Global leaders often use diplomacy to express concern about military bases, negotiate agreements, or prevent tension. For example, China might use diplomatic statements to warn the US about Bagram, while Europe might use diplomacy to encourage cooperation. Learning how to say and understand diplomacy in context is very helpful for following international news.
Let's also talk about influence. Influence is the ability to affect another country's decisions or actions. Bagram Airbase is a tool of influence. Whoever controls it can affect Afghanistan's politics, regional security, and economic opportunities. The US sees Bagram as a way to extend its influence near China, while China worries that US influence could block its own economic projects. For learners, understanding the word influence helps you read or listen to news about power struggles anywhere in the world.
And of course, the word tension is very common in these discussions. Tension means stress, conflict, or disagreement between countries. Whenever military bases, resources, or borders are involved, tension can increase. Bagram Airbase creates tension because different countries see it differently. Some see opportunity, some see threat. For English learners, you can practice using this word in sentences like, "The new base increased tension in the region," or "Diplomacy can reduce tension between countries."
Now let's imagine the global reactions together. European leaders may call for negotiations to maintain peace, emphasizing diplomacy and stability. China may issue statements warning that foreign military presence could create risks. Neighboring countries in South Asia may express concern about safety and border security. Each reaction is influenced by geography, history, and strategic interests. For English learners, notice the repeated use of words like stability, diplomacy, and strategic interests.
It is also interesting to see how international media covers Bagram. Newspapers, news channels, and online platforms in different countries report it differently. American media may highlight security and strategic advantage. Chinese media may emphasize sovereignty and regional stability. Afghan media often focuses on the local impact, like safety for civilians and national pride. For learners, observing these perspectives can help you understand bias, word choice, and context in English reporting.
Let's practice a few sentences together. You can say, "Global alliances influence the debate over Bagram Air Base." Or, "Diplomacy is important to reduce tension in Central Asia." Or, "Countries watch Bagram because it affects regional stability." Repeating these sentences aloud will help you remember key terms and understand how they are used in political discussions. It also strengthens your confidence when reading or listening to international news.
Finally, dear listeners, this section teaches us that no country exists in isolation. Decisions in Afghanistan affect many nations. The Bagram debate shows the complexity of global politics. Alliances, influence, diplomacy, and tension all play a role. By understanding these terms and observing international reactions, English learners not only improve language skills, but also gain knowledge about how countries interact in a connected world.
And this knowledge prepares you for future sections, where we will analyze potential outcomes and predictions. When we understand global reactions, we can better interpret statements, news articles, and political speeches. For learners, connecting language with real-world examples is the key to mastering English while staying informed. Remember to use today's vocabulary in your own sentences and think about how alliances, influence, diplomacy, and tension appear in other news stories you read.
Julia, so far we have discussed politics, history, and global reactions. Now it is time to look at the economic side of Bagram Airbase. Maintaining a large military base is not cheap. The United States spent billions of dollars over the years to operate, repair, and staff Bagram. This includes costs for fuel, equipment, housing, food, and salaries for military personnel. For learners, the word budget is important here. A budget is a plan for spending money, and in this case, Bagram required a very large budget. Exactly, Adam. Running a base is like running a small city. There are many resources needed, from electricity and water to planes and medical facilities. Every decision about Bagram involved economic calculations. Is the cost worth the security benefit? For China, the economic perspective is different. Instead of spending billions on a base, China focuses on regional investments, like roads, railways, and infrastructure in Afghanistan and neighboring countries. This allows China to gain influence through economics rather than military presence.
Let's pause to highlight vocabulary. Investment is putting money into something with the expectation of gaining benefits. In this case, China invests in infrastructure to increase influence. Resources are things like money, materials, and manpower needed to achieve a goal. Running Bagram required huge resources, while China tries to use its resources differently, focusing on trade and economic projects. Practicing these words will help learners discuss international economics clearly.
Another important term is trade. Trade refers to buying and selling goods between countries. China's investments in Afghanistan and Central Asia often involve trade agreements, which can benefit local economies and increase China's influence. In contrast, the US does not rely on trade to gain influence at Bagram. Instead, it relies on military presence and spending. Comparing these approaches helps learners see that economic strategies can vary widely between nations.
Neutral analysis is essential here. We do not judge whether one approach is better than the other, but we can explain the economic logic. The US focuses on security, requiring a large budget and immediate resources. China focuses on long-term economic influence, using trade and investment. Both approaches involve careful calculations, planning, and allocation of resources. Understanding this helps learners see that international politics is not only about power, but also about economics.
Let's give an example. Imagine a country wants to gain influence in a neighboring nation. One approach is to build a military base and station soldiers there, which costs a lot. Another approach is to fund schools, build roads, and increase trade, which is an investment in soft influence. Both approaches aim to achieve influence, but use different tools. Today's learners can see how vocabulary, like budget, trade, investment, and resources applies in real-world situations.
For English learners, it is useful to practice sentences with these words. You can say, "The US spent a large budget on Bagram Airbase," or China invests in roads and infrastructure to increase influence. Or, trade agreements are an important part of regional strategy. Or, running a military base requires many resources. Repeating these sentences will help you become comfortable with economic vocabulary in international discussions.
Another key point is cost-benefit analysis. This is a way to compare what you spend versus what you gain. For the US, the cost of Bagram is enormous, but the perceived benefit is security and strategic presence. For China, investments in trade and infrastructure are smaller in immediate cost, but may bring long-term influence and profits. This concept is important for learners to understand how countries make economic decisions in politics.
Finally, dear listeners, economic dimensions are often overlooked in news reports. Many people focus on politics or military actions, but money is always a key factor. By understanding vocabulary like budget, trade, investment, and resources, you can read articles, watch news, and discuss these topics in English. Economics is closely linked to strategy, and in the case of Bagram, both military spending and economic investments play crucial roles in shaping regional outcomes.
So, to summarize, the economic perspective gives us a more complete picture of the debate over Bagram Airbase. It shows that influence is not only measured by soldiers and bases, but also by investments, trade, and resource allocation. For English learners, practicing today's vocabulary in real examples will strengthen your language skills while also helping you understand the complex choices countries face. Economics and politics are always connected, and this is a perfect example.
Julia, after discussing economics, we need to consider security concerns. Bagram Airbase is not just a symbol or a financial decision, it has major implications for regional security. The presence or return of a powerful military force can influence how safe countries feel. Security, in this context, means protecting borders, people, and infrastructure from threats. For English learners, notice the word security. It is often used in both politics and daily life.
That's right, Adam. One key issue is terrorism. Groups in Afghanistan have used the region to plan attacks in the past. A base like Bagram can help monitor these groups and prevent threats from spreading. But it can also make the area a target. The presence of foreign troops sometimes increases tension and creates risks. The word threat is important here. It means a potential danger, and in news and discussions about security, it appears frequently.
Another concern is border security. Afghanistan shares borders with Pakistan, China, Iran, and several other countries. Controlling Bagram allows whoever is there to monitor movement across these borders. This can prevent smuggling, illegal entry, or infiltration by militant groups. For learners, border is a simple but essential word in political English. We often hear it in the news: border security, border conflict, border control.
The rivalry between the US and China also has security dimensions. If the US regains influence at Bagram, China may respond by increasing its military or economic presence nearby. This can create tension, or what we call risk. Risk is the possibility of harm or loss. Leaders think about risk constantly. They balance potential gains against possible dangers. For English learners, risk is a versatile word, useful in everyday and political contexts.
Let's highlight more vocabulary. Terrorism refers to violent acts meant to create fear for political purposes. Security measures are steps taken to prevent danger. Instability is the opposite of stability, meaning unpredictable or dangerous conditions. These words appear in news reports, official statements, and educational content. Using them in sentences will help learners understand both English and global issues.
For example, you can say, "The base improves border security," or "Terrorism remains a threat in the region," or "Instability can increase risks for neighboring countries." Repeating such sentences helps learners remember vocabulary and understand how it is applied to real-world events. It also improves your ability to discuss international security confidently in English.
Another perspective is how world leaders evaluate future risks. Decisions about military bases involve careful planning and prediction. They consider worst-case scenarios. What if there is an attack? What if rival nations respond aggressively? Risk assessment in international relations requires both intelligence and experience. For learners, the phrase risk assessment is valuable and appears often in policy reports and news articles.
Yes, and it is important to remember that these security concerns are interconnected. Terrorism, border security, and rivalry do not exist separately. Actions in one area affect another. For instance, the presence of Bagram may reduce terrorist activity locally but increase tension between the US and China. Understanding these links helps learners see the complexity of global decision-making and the vocabulary used to describe it.
Practicing sentences with today's vocabulary can reinforce learning. For example, risk assessment is essential for leaders, or instability in Afghanistan affects the entire region, or security measures help protect citizens from threats. You can also combine words. Border security reduces the risk of terrorism. These exercises help learners connect language with real-world concepts.
Finally, dear listeners, reflecting on security teaches an important lesson. Decisions are rarely simple. Leaders must weigh safety, diplomacy, economics, and influence simultaneously. Studying vocabulary like security, threat, border, terrorism, instability, and risk allows English learners to understand not only news articles, but also the reasoning behind decisions. By connecting words to ideas, you gain both language and knowledge.
In conclusion, Bagram Airbase affects more than politics or economics. It directly impacts security. Terrorism, border protection, and US-China rivalry all intersect here. Understanding these issues through English vocabulary helps learners follow complex discussions and participate confidently in debates. Security is a critical lens for viewing international events, and today's words will help you do just that. Julia, after discussing security, politics, and economics, it's time to focus on language itself. English learners often struggle with phrases used in diplomacy because they sound formal and complex. Today, we will analyze common diplomatic expressions and practice them. Understanding these phrases is key to following news, speeches, and international debates. For instance, one frequently used phrase is strategic interest.
That's right, Adam. Strategic interest refers to something very important for a country's long-term plans, especially regarding security, economy, or influence. For example, when the US talks about Bagram, it refers to the base as a strategic interest because controlling it strengthens regional influence. Dear listeners, try repeating. Bagram Airbase is a strategic interest for the United States. Notice the rhythm and stress on the words strategic and interest.
Another common phrase is mutual cooperation. This is used when two or more countries work together for a shared benefit. For example, China and neighboring countries may talk about mutual cooperation on trade projects. For learners, you can practice saying, mutual cooperation between nations helps maintain peace. Repeating this aloud improves both pronunciation and comprehension of formal diplomatic English.
We also often hear geopolitical tension. This phrase describes disagreements or conflict between countries due to geography, politics, or strategic interests. For example, the US-China debate over Bagram creates geopolitical tension in Central Asia. Listeners, try. Geopolitical tension can affect regional stability. Breaking it into parts, geopolitical tension can help with pronunciation and understanding.
Let's practice combining these phrases in longer sentences. For instance, the United States considers Bagram a strategic interest, while mutual cooperation with allies can reduce geopolitical tension. By practicing complex sentences, learners get used to the flow of diplomatic English. Julia, repetition is important here, right?
Absolutely, Adam. Repetition and context are key. Let's repeat each phrase slowly. First, strategic interest. Now, mutual cooperation. And finally, geopolitical tension. Practicing this way helps learners recognize phrases when reading or listening to international news. It also improves speaking skills, so you can use these phrases in your own discussions.
Another technique is role play. Imagine we are diplomats in a negotiation. I can say, "Our country values strategic interest in Central Asia." You respond, "We support mutual cooperation to reduce geopolitical tension." This exercise shows how phrases are used naturally in dialogue, and it gives learners confidence in real conversations.
Yes, role play is very effective. It teaches not only vocabulary, but also tone and formality. Diplomatic English is polite, clear, and precise. For example, instead of saying "we don't like this," diplomats might say, "We express concern regarding recent developments." Using formal phrases helps learners understand official statements and news reports.
Let's explore one more phrase. Maintaining stability. Stability is a key goal in diplomacy. Leaders often say they aim at maintaining stability in a region. For example, mutual cooperation is essential for maintaining stability in Central Asia. Listeners, try repeating this slowly and clearly. Focus on the word stability. It is often used in news and political discussions.
And remember, learning diplomatic language is not just about memorizing words. It's about understanding meaning and context. Phrases like strategic interest, mutual cooperation, geopolitical tension, and maintaining stability all have specific roles in international communication. Practicing them in sentences, role plays, and repetition helps learners internalize the language.
Dear listeners, to summarize today's learning focus, try these exercises. Say each phrase aloud 10 times. Create your own sentences using each phrase, and imagine a dialogue between two diplomats using them. For example, "Our strategic interest is security. We encourage mutual cooperation," or "Geopolitical tension must be reduced to maintain stability." Repeating and practicing builds both vocabulary and confidence.
Exactly, Adam. By the end of this section, learners should feel more comfortable recognizing these phrases in news reports or speeches. Using them in practice helps you sound more professional and understand complex discussions. English for diplomacy may seem formal at first, but with practice, it becomes clear, natural, and very useful.
So, dear listeners, remember to keep practicing these key diplomatic phrases. They appear everywhere in international relations, news, and political debates. The goal is not only to understand what world leaders are saying, but also to use these phrases yourself with confidence. By connecting words to real-world situations, you improve both English and your understanding of global events. Julia, as we add this final section, let's think about the lessons our listeners can take from the Bagram debate, not only in politics, but also in learning English. Studying international issues gives learners the opportunity to practice real-world vocabulary. Words like sovereignty, stability, diplomacy, investment, and geopolitical tension are not just formal. They appear in news, speeches, and educational content.
That's right, Adam. English learners can improve both comprehension and speaking skills by connecting words to context. For example, when we read an article about US-China relations, we see phrases like strategic interest and mutual cooperation. Practicing these in sentences helps you sound natural and professional. Dear listeners, try creating your own examples using today's vocabulary to strengthen memory and usage.
Another important lesson is about critical thinking. English learning is not just about memorizing words, but also understanding concepts. By analyzing Trump's perspective, China's response, and Afghanistan's role, learners practice reasoning in English. You can explain ideas like, "Afghanistan's sovereignty is central to stability in the region," or geopolitical tension increases when major powers compete. These sentences combine vocabulary with analytical thinking.
Role-playing is also very helpful. Imagine you are a diplomat explaining a country's position. You might say, "Our strategic interest is ensuring regional stability," or "Mutual cooperation with neighbors reduces risk." By speaking aloud, learners connect language with thought. This technique improves pronunciation, fluency, and the ability to participate in discussions about global topics.
Let's also reflect on listening skills. When you follow news podcasts or videos, you hear phrases like risk assessment, investment, border security, and geopolitical tension. Recognizing these words helps learners understand complex content without translation. Listening repeatedly while noting new vocabulary is one of the fastest ways to improve English comprehension.
Another key skill is summarizing. English learners can practice summarizing the Bagram debate in their own words. Trump sees Bagram as a strategic interest. China focuses on economic influence, and Afghanistan prioritizes sovereignty. Summarizing trains learners to identify main ideas, use formal vocabulary, and communicate clearly in English.
Julia, as we conclude today's discussion, let's summarize what we have learned. First, Donald Trump's perspective on Bagram Airbase emphasizes American security, strategic interest, and regional influence. The U.S. views control of the base as essential for protecting its long-term goals in Central Asia. For English learners, note how we use phrases like strategic interest and regional influence to discuss politics formally and clearly.
That's right, Adam. Meanwhile, China's stance reflects concern about sovereignty, regional stability, and economic expansion. Beijing worries that U.S. control over Bagram could limit China's projects and increase geopolitical tension. Vocabulary like sovereignty, stability, and geopolitical tension helps learners understand and describe these complex international issues accurately. Repeating these words in context strengthens both comprehension and speaking skills.
And of course, Afghanistan's role is central. The country's government and citizens want sovereignty, safety, and self-determination. Their perspectives remind us that local voices are crucial in global debates. English learners can practice using phrases like Afghanistan seeks stability and sovereignty, or local perspectives are essential in diplomacy. These sentences connect language to real-world understanding.
Beyond politics and economics, we also learn the importance of diplomacy and dialogue. World leaders use formal phrases, careful negotiation, and communication to manage tension. English phrases like mutual cooperation and maintaining stability are tools that diplomats rely on. Learners practicing these phrases can follow global news more confidently and even engage in their own discussions about international affairs.
Dear listeners, one key takeaway is that global issues are interconnected. U.S. policies, China's investments, and Afghanistan's local decisions all affect regional and international dynamics. Using English to describe these relationships requires understanding both vocabulary and context. Phrases like strategic interest, diplomacy, influence, and geopolitical tension are essential tools for learners who want to discuss the world clearly and accurately.
Let's also reflect on learning English through this topic. By studying international news, students practice reading, listening, and speaking. They encounter formal phrases, complex ideas, and professional vocabulary. Practicing sentences aloud, role-playing conversations, and summarizing information are effective methods to internalize these words. For example, mutual cooperation reduces tension, or strategic interest guides national decisions.
Another important point is repetition and active use. Learners should not only recognize words, but also apply them. Try writing short summaries of news articles using today's vocabulary, or explain the Bagram debate in your own words. Phrases like sovereignty, stability, risk assessment, and investment can be used in both discussions and writing exercises. This approach strengthens fluency and comprehension simultaneously.
As we wrap up, it is clear that diplomacy, dialogue, and careful analysis are essential in global affairs. English is the language that connects learners to these discussions. By practicing vocabulary, phrases, and sentence structures, students gain both language skills and knowledge about international relations. For instance, you can say, effective diplomacy requires mutual cooperation and risk assessment, which demonstrates both language mastery and understanding of global issues.
Dear listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey through the Bagram debate. Remember, Trump's position, China's concerns, and Afghanistan's sovereignty each contribute to a complex story of strategy, economics, and security. Practicing today's vocabulary and phrases will not only improve your English, but also your ability to understand and discuss important world events.
Finally, let's leave you with an educational reflection. Learning English allows us to participate in global conversations. It enables students to read news, listen to debates, and discuss diplomacy with clarity and confidence. Keep practicing phrases like geopolitical tension, strategic interest, mutual cooperation, and stability. With each sentence, you build skills that connect language to knowledge and understanding.
Thank you, dear listeners, for following today's podcast on the Trump versus China debate over Bagram Airbase. We hope you enjoyed learning both the topic and the English phrases. Keep practicing, stay curious, and remember, English is more than a language. It's a bridge to understanding our world.
Yes, Adam. And dear listeners, we encourage you to write in the comments where you are listening from, share your thoughts on the Bagram debate, and tell us which phrases you found most useful today. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the English Globe so you can continue improving your English while learning about global issues.